Hey everyone, Samantha here. Welcome to another live episode of Trans IRL. Thanks for sticking with us while we had last week off. You may notice my background no longer has a piano, and that's because I'm not recording in my dining room anymore, which thankfully for me doesn't mean I don't have to tear down my studio after every show. I'm very excited to have a new location where I can call in and host here. So speaking of the show, if you're new to the broadcast or just behind on episodes, don't forget to head over to our YouTube page where you can find our previous recordings, and you can subscribe there if you haven't already. Tonight, we're also live streaming on our Facebook page, which is Trans IRL Show, and you can like us over there as well. Our Instagram page, Trans IRL, is approaching 2,000 followers. We're so close. And it's the best way for you to submit questions to guests and catch bonus material. So please, if you get a chance, follow us there as well. As excited as I am about my little studio that I'm working on here, our actual Trans IRL studio is being helmed by Addison, who is monitoring the live chats on both YouTube and Facebook tonight while simultaneously running the show. Somehow, she does it all. So if you do have any questions tonight as we are talking with our guests, please go ahead and put them in the chats. And we'll try to get to as many of those at the end of the episode as possible. So on to tonight's topic. It's one that I'm asked about on almost a daily basis. And it might actually be the reason that you originally came to this show or my Instagram page in the first place. Like many people out there, when I started my transition, I was already married. And my dysphoria and identity were something that I never wanted to address and I never planned to address in my marriage. It's something I struggled with for almost my entire life, and I made every effort to put it away, but I couldn't until I finally had to address it. 10 years into my marriage, and I shared my deepest, darkest secret with my wife, someone who had no idea of what I was wrestling with. Tonight's guest found himself in a very similar situation, and I think it's a situation that a lot of trans individuals find themselves in when they do transition in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond. At this point, I'd like to introduce Thomas to the show. Hi, Thomas.
Hi.
It feels like I just saw you.
I know.
So Thomas and his husband live up in San Francisco, and I had a chance to run into the two of them over the weekend while I was up there. And there's an awesome picture of us hanging out. That was great that it worked out that way. I'm just so happy that we had a chance to talk for a little while.
It was so fun. We were so excited to meet you. Sam is not in the picture. He's taking the picture, but
he's always taking the picture.
Yes, he is.
So let's get into our stories a little bit here. I'm curious a little bit about your background when it comes to your identity, and let's start from the beginning. Growing up, what was that like for you, and when did those first feelings of dysphoria kick in for you?
It's a good question. I thought about that a lot, of course, over the course of just coming out, of understanding my identity and sharing my story with the world. And, it was complicated for me. I think I grew up in a wonderful, loving family who I still love very much. And I have two older brothers, quite a bit older than me, 6 and 10 years older than me. And growing up, I guess I just always knew my identity kind of as like a tomboy, the very boyish girl who just wanted to do all the boy things and, didn't understand why my brothers got to go swimming in just trunks and, without shirts. And I was just, having to wear bathing suits and dresses and things like that. So I was always fighting my mom on clothes and making compromises. Like, I'll wear your dress, but I get to wear my Reebok high tops and things like that. And in terms of really, I just didn't have any knowledge or understanding of what being transgender even was, what that meant. And so it took me a long time to really even understand that was something that I could identify with and that could be me. So I was really kind of coming out of college and like in my 20s before I really started to understand those things in that world. And then, in that way, it started making me reflect on my life and being like, oh my gosh, like this moment or that moment, like this all makes so much more sense now, in understanding that, being trans could be an option. And that's kind of
And
how
what
it
you're
went for
describing,
me.
I don't think it's uncommon.
Yeah.
I think that's a fairly common way that people come about this. I don't think there's anyone that sets out in this process like, this is how I'm going to be. It's sort of a lifelong process of understanding yourself and getting to the point
Yeah.
where it's like, oh no, wait, this actually makes perfect sense of what I've been fighting with this entire time.
Exactly. Yeah. It
Yeah.
like a light bulb goes on and you're like, oh, that's what it
Oh
meant.
no.
Like, yeah,
And
exactly.
for me, it was a little different, but similar. The feelings that I had around dysphoria started very young, and like you, I didn't have the words to actually put to it until I was in my teens. And this is, growing up in the mid '90s, early to mid '90s at that point, before I finally understood what being transgender was, or that it was even an option. That no, there are people out there that feel this way. Um, and I knew from that young teenage that this felt like that would probably be the way I would go if I could, but I was just terrified about these thoughts. I was terrified of what it would do to my family. I was terrified what it would do to me, and I did my best to put them away at a very young age. So by the time I was in my early 20s, by the time I made it to college, I knew that what I was fighting against and tried every step of the way to not let those dysphoric feelings take control, to not let those come out, and to stuff them as deeply as possible away where I could try to live a quote unquote normal life, right? Like this is what's expected of me. I'm expected to be this person. I can put these thoughts away and try not to let them run my life. And I was right around the time I met Laura. But before I talk about that, I'd actually like to know where you met Sam.
Yeah. So Sam and I met in our undergraduate at Iowa State University. So we both went to school at Iowa State, and we were in the same department. We both have degrees in engineering. So I was actually a year ahead of Sam in school, and we had this program in our department where older students would mentor groups of the first year class. So one of us would be assigned, 8 or 9 students, and we would mentor that group. And Sam was actually a part of my mentor group, so I was like his mentor at the time when we met. But we didn't start dating until probably the next year. So technically, I wasn't like his mentor by the time we started dating. But yeah, we started dating. We started dating in college, so it was like his sophomore year, my junior year, and we've been inseparable ever since. Yeah.
When did you know that he was the one for you?
That's a good question. I think when it came to our relationship, it was like we kind of got together and we just kind of never left each other's sides, and it was just like this sort of magnetic thing where we were just spending most all of our time together. And even a few months in at school, we were staying in each other's apartments and like all this stuff, and we just would never leave each other's side. And I don't have like a oh my gosh moment of like he did something or said something that was like made anything click. It was just like knowing that every moment together felt safe and funny and just like goofy and I don't know, just relaxing and unlike any other relationship I'd ever been in.
Oh, that's so awesome. Oh, I'm like tearing up. Those pictures were so sweet.
I know, they're
I
so
do want to
cute.
say they are for Laura and my relationship. I met Laura when I was 20, in my undergrad at the University of Arizona, and I met her in the marching band at the University of Arizona. So I was marching trumpet, and she was also marching trumpet that year. And we hit things off really quickly. And the first thing we bonded over was she took me. I think we were going to lunch at band camp, and no jokes about band camp, but she drove me over to lunch, and in her car she had a Weird Al CD, back when people listened to CDs. And we just totally connected over that because I was a big Weird Al fan and she was a big Weird Al fan. And from there, we just started talking and hit things off. And it really wasn't long after that we were a couple. And it was about a year after that we got engaged and started planning on getting married. And, this entire time I was still dealing with those thoughts and dysphoric feelings. I had this wonderful woman in front of me that represented everything that I wanted in a relationship. She was my dream. And I knew that if I addressed this dysphoria, this feeling of unease I had inside, that I could lose everything. And there was actually a point in time before the wedding. I want to say it was about 6 months before the wedding where I actually called the wedding off. I asked if we could, take a break. And she didn't know why. At that point in time, she still didn't know what I was struggling with. But I really fought with my identity. And if I wanted to do anything about it then and there, or put it away for good. And ultimately, what I decided was, no, this woman is amazing. We have this whole life planned out together. We have so much to look forward to. I can put these feelings away. I can be the man that she needs and go forward with the wedding. And that's what we did. So we were married in 2006. There's an awesome photo. And it was a beautiful wedding and a really beautiful time. Oh. Oh.
Mm.
Ooh.
Really went for it.
Wow.
Nice.
I really liked her. I still really like her. So let's talk about coming to terms with, who we were or who we are and how we finally communicated that to our partners. And I'll let you talk about it a little bit first, but, how did you finally broach the subject with Sam?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so after, we were dating in undergrad and we moved on to grad school together. And within our first year of grad school, we got married. And then a couple years later is when I really started really opening up and grappling kind of with my identity and started to really have language to put to it. I had started seeing a therapist at the time, which I'm so glad that I did for multiple reasons. But I had a lot of things that I had been carrying around with me for years and years, somewhat unrelated to my identity. And that journey with therapy and kind of working through those issues that I was having really opened up space in my life for me to really dig in to my gender and to my identity and to my sexuality. And I just remember I would go to these therapy sessions and I would come home in the evening, and it's not like we would totally just dish the dirt on my whole therapy session, but we just talk, Sam and I just talk about everything. And, we would just talk about what it was that I had discussed that day with my therapist, or what I was going through, or if I was having any issues with anybody, and vice versa, how his day was and things like that. And so when it came to, I guess, coming out or opening up to Sam about my gender, it was really this process that was happening so organically, every week. I'd go to therapy once a week and I'd come back and we would just talk. And so it felt much more like this very, like, we were walking this road together. There wasn't a moment where I had figured it all out, sat Sam down and was like, I'm a man all at once. It was like this very slow process of unearthing, what I was feeling and, why I felt weird about different areas of my body, or why I was continually just so low on energy or sad or depressed. And we just walked that road together. And I'm so glad that it happened the way that it happened, because it always felt, to me at least, because I can only speak from my perspective, but from my perspective, it always felt like that he was a part of every piece of it. And, there wasn't anything that I ever really felt like I was holding back from him. Now, there were moments where I knew I was about to say something that I was scared to say. When I admitted that I wanted to have top surgery, when I really first said, I think I'm a man, like saying those words out loud, those were scary moments, and there was always hesitation, but somehow we were able to just always be so open about it. And some days I don't know how, but we were, and it was really, really great.
I think that's really beautiful how you both worked through that together. So when you finally got to the point where you said, I am a man, it really wasn't as much a surprise as it was the call to those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. It was just, in some days it would be like he was just waiting for me to say it, like he would just, like, he could see it, he knew what was coming, but he was just kind of just giving me my time and, like, letting me get there, and I took my time on some of that, because it was really scary. It was really, really scary.
I think my experience is so different than that. I wish my experience was more like yours. But for me, I was in that lockdown mode and was doing my best to keep everything under control. And, through our marriage, I did a fairly good job of keeping it under wraps. The busier I was, the more I was involved in work or projects, and then raising children, the less I had to think about those dysphoric thoughts that were slowly gnawing away at the back of my mind. Eventually, a couple years into our marriage, I did break down and try to go to therapy, but I really didn't understand how therapy worked at that time. And I knew I had this sadness. I knew I had this feeling of uncomfortableness. And I was hoping that my therapist would just guess what was wrong with me, which that's not how therapy works, right? A therapist can only work with what you tell them about yourself. So what ended up happening was I'd go on and off antidepressants every couple of months. And antidepressants would help at first because they sort of level you out, and that's a good thing. But what they don't do is give you any relief from dysphoria. So what I would end up doing is feeling level on the antidepressants, but then the dysphoria would come back, and then there was nowhere to hide. I had no emotions to put them behind, and then I'd end up going off the antidepressants again, and that cycle repeated several times. And every time that I'd try again, the dysphoria would continue to mount. And when we were about 10 years into our relationship, it was to the point where I could no longer get through a day. I was just so broken by this dysphoria, by having to live as this person that I knew I wasn't. And this was 2016. So almost 3 years ago, or a little over 3 years ago now, was my really bad year. And almost all of 2016, I was just in a terrible depression because of these feelings. And it was around that time that I accepted that one way or another, I was going to have to deal with this. But I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified of coming out to Laura. I was absolutely terrified of losing my kids. I was terrified of losing my job, my family, my friends. This is what I had always said I wasn't going to address. And now I knew that one way or another, it was going to have to come to a head. And what actually ended up happening was, I got so despondent that I had a plan to end my life in October of 2016. And thankfully, I was unsuccessful in that. But immediately after that was when I knew that, I didn't want to hurt myself. I didn't want to not be here. I just wanted a chance to be here as myself. And I knew that in order to do that, I would have to take the chance and come out. And it was a month later to the day. Laura had been helping me try to find a therapist. And she did this, she was great. She knew I was suffering this year. She knew I was just burdened with something. She didn't know what it was, but she helped me find a therapist. And I actually had to say, no, this therapist isn't going to work. Because I was looking at therapists that specialized in LGBT issues. So I went back to her with a list of like 3 therapists that all specialized in trans or queer issues. I'm like, can we try to get one of these? And I had this idea in my head that I really wanted a therapist to talk with me about this before coming out to Laura, but she put it together. And I don't want to, put too many words in her mouth, so I won't. But she actually asked me shortly after I gave her that list if maybe what I was dealing with was a gender issue. And at that point in time, all I could muster was maybe. And that was really how I came out to her for the first time. And that started our process of trying to work through this together. So that was a lot. I will say, yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to say it's kind of, I don't know. It's amazing how like the people we love can sometimes have the words before we have them. I mean, it's almost how things would happen some days with Sam and I, like I was saying. It's just like he would kind of know where I was headed before I knew, or it felt that way anyway. So to hear that, that's kind of, Laura taking your cues and kind of putting some pieces together, but also just knowing you so deeply in her own way and, being able to ask you that, I think is really special.
And what was really hard in that situation is that, we had been together for 10 years at that point, or married 10 years, together for even longer. We never really kept secrets from each other. Outside of birthday or Christmas presents, we were open. We talked about everything together, but I had this so locked down. And that was hard. That was hard to admit that I had kept something from her all these years. It's something I felt bad about. It's something we really had to work through this process. And even now, today, that she didn't know. And that's a big thing. When you talk about trust in a relationship, to keep something like this from a partner, that's something that needs to be talked about quite a bit. And we did quite a bit early on in the process. I don't think that at this point she holds it against me. She understands why I did what I did, but some of that pain is still there. So let's talk a little bit more about your early process, your early day in your transition, and what the two of you, what did the two of you face early on?
Many things. What to start with? I think as much as we were really good at communicating, I think there was just always so much processing going on. So about, I don't know how many months in, but eventually we transitioned from just me going to therapy to both of us going to see my therapist together. So this sort of gender twisted couples therapy that was really, really helpful to just sit down and take time for the both of us, because something that I struggle with a lot throughout all of this is that I always feel like, you know, my transition takes so much energy in the relationship, that it takes up so much space, because it is such a huge part of our lives. And, you know, I end up having to process around some shame and guilt about taking up that space and what it means for Sam. So being able to go to therapy together was really helpful for us, because it gave him space to check in on his own things, not just like, Sam, how are you doing with Thomas's transition? It was like, Sam, how are you just doing? You know, because it felt often that it would get lost. And I so often just in that point in our lives, and even still to many days, because I'm just like needy, I was in need, you know, I needed a lot. I needed a lot of support. I needed a lot of space to recover from, you know, just going to work every day. That took a lot of energy, especially before I came out, because I was still trying to go to work. I had come out to Sam, but I hadn't come out to really anybody else. And I was trying to go to work, and I thought that I could just make through without having to do this. So I was in grad school and I had 1 year left, and I just thought that if I could just make it one more year, then grad school would be over, and like magically after that I could obviously just start a whole new life, and like it would be so easy, which is just such a joke. But that's what I told myself. So I was trying to go to work and not being out, and it was just so exhausting. So it took a lot of time and energy from the both of us, to just keep up with each other. And so therapy was really helpful as a time and a space for us to just sit down and quietly talk to one another and reflect. And, you know, there were just so many ways in which Sam had to support me. So once I finally realized that I couldn't just not come out, that I needed to really come out to everyone, that I needed to do this, you know, I started the process and I jumped in. I came out to my boss and to some people that I worked with. And then Sam started to realize that he would, on occasion, also need to be coming out for me. So I remember him talking about one particular conversation that he had with his boss, where he had to explain, essentially come out for me to his boss and explain, you know, what was going on, and that my name and my pronouns were changing. And I remember he came back from that conversation and he was just like, wow. He was like, that was so much more emotionally, you know, challenging than I thought it would be. And it was kind of one of those moments where he got to see in his own way, very intimately what I had been going through with other people in my life. And he's also had to support me in so many other ways, like particularly with my family, who are supportive, but it's been a hard road, and it was, I would say, rather traumatic for them at the beginning. So Sam did a lot of standing up for me and speaking for me when I was too hurt to be able to say anything. And, you know, without that, I don't know where I would be with my relationships with my family. So I'm just really grateful to have had that sort of thing. So yeah, there's so many things, so many things we've had to go through. I feel like I'm just like, I could meander on for days and days, but
Right.
yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. You know, a marriage is as hard work as it is, and you throw a transition on top of it. I think for the couples that, you know, are working through this, every day is work. Every day, is a little bit, further down the list of things that need to happen. I know that when I did come out to Laura, in that moment, she was supportive, but at the same time, she wasn't sure she was going to stay. And what we ended up doing, basically starting that evening, was kicking off these long conversations. And I just remember those early months in transition. We were up every night till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, talking through everything. We had to rehash every aspect, every facet of our relationship. We really had to understand, what did we mean to each other? How are we going to move forward as a couple? What did this mean for her? What did this mean for me? How are we going to come out to family? There's so much in this process that you need to talk about. There's a great picture there. That was one of the first times I went out in public. But she was with me during this, and you brought up therapy, which I think is a huge part of this process. You need to have that opportunity to talk through this with somebody else, as well as with your spouse. There's a lot that I had to unpack about myself. There's a lot that she had to unpack about this process as well. And the reality is, in a transition, the people around us transition as well. For most people, it's not a huge deal, right? Most people, friends and extended family, all they have to do is get your name right, get those pronouns right? And they're on board. That's what they need. But for our spouses, for the people closest to us, our transition is their transition. And I know in Laura's case, she had to come to terms with being married to a woman. And I don't want to talk too much about, her journey in exploring her identity, but I will say that, about a month ago, we did an episode of Trans IRL that focused on transition from the spouse's point of view. And we actually had 3 spouses on the episode that all talk through their experiences in coming to terms with their spouse that transition. It was a great episode. And instead of me putting words in her mouth, I'd rather let her do the talking. So please check out the spouse's take if you want to hear more of Laura's journey of self-discovery and exploration, as well as some of the other spouses there as well. It was such a great episode. I think we should do one again because there are so many people in this situation. But for us, what we tried to do was talk through the issues and put them away. Work through little chunks of problems, figure it out. Okay, put that one back, get the next one, and just try to constantly move forward, right? Keep moving forward, keep working on understanding where we wanted to be, what we wanted to do. And it was about a year into my transition that Laura proposed to me for our vow renewal. So, after about a year, she was on board. She wanted to stay. And I will talk about my sexuality. I have always been attracted to women. I'm still attracted to women. That didn't change as part of my transition. Sexuality and gender identity are 2 different things. And this beautiful woman was all that I wanted 10 years ago, and she's all that I want today. And I'm thankful that she wants me as well. So I do want to ask Thomas, in this process, did you ever think you would lose Sam?
I don't ever remember truly questioning if I would lose him, but I distinctly remember worrying about attraction, because our relationship had formed on this sort of heterosexual basis, and as me as a woman, and as far as I understood his sexuality, he was attracted to women. So I really struggled with the worry that when I started medically transitioning in the ways that I desired, that he might find me not attractive. And I expressed those worries to him on many occasions, over and over again, probably annoying him a bit. And he was always so reassuring, like in a way that I guess I just hadn't quite grown to the point of really understanding that. And he was just at this other space with us where, you know, he would always tell me, you know, what this whole process is doing for you is you're becoming more you. And he would tell me, I love you and I'm attracted to you. So if there's more of you to love, then that's great. You know, that's a bonus. That's even better. And early on in my transition and my understanding, it was really hard to accept that, because I was in this space of fear and denial, and I also was confused about my own sexuality because for so long I think my own sexuality had held me up from understanding a lot of my gender. I growing up and throughout my whole life, I've always been attracted to men, and you know, society told me that I was a woman. So that, and society tells me that men and women, you know, a-okay, which is ridiculous, but you know, that's what I was told and that's what I grew up with. So I was like, okay, 1 + 1 = 2. This all seems to make sense. And as I finally started to unearth my gender identity, I got the moment to look at my sexuality and be like, oh, like I like men because I'm a gay man. It was like this moment of like a light bulb going off and being like, wow, you know, um, that makes so much sense. And that was really exciting to me, you know, to have that moment of realization, and it felt so right in so many ways. And by the time I had that realization, Sam and I had so many conversations and had done so much growing both individually and together that you know, I realized that my sexuality doesn't have to define his sexuality, and my gender also doesn't have to define his sexuality, and he's allowed to be attracted to me, but not identify as a gay man. He can identify as however he feels he most identifies, which I can't speak for, but, you know, and that's okay. You know, that things are going to be okay. And as long as we keep communicating, you know, hopefully things just continue to get better. But yeah, I mean, the fear, the worry of will someone leave, or I guess I really framed it around just the loss of the potential loss of the love. And the thought never really occurred to me like, will he physically go? It was just like, will his love for me diminish? And he was always so reassuring that just wouldn't be possible. And so far he's been very right, which is great.
Now, you really touched on something important there, right? That our identity, our sexuality doesn't define or reflect on our spouses at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, it was actually something I struggled with. Like as we were going through this process, like, well, yeah, no, I'm a lesbian. There was a part of me that wanted Laura to like identify the same way, and it took me a while to figure out how messed up that is to try to impose that on somebody else. You know, what was important to both of us in this process was that, you know, we still loved each other and we still, had a physical attraction to each other. And that was all that mattered to either of us. And it doesn't matter how she identifies versus how I identify, as long as we are each other's people. That's all that matters at the end of the day. You know, people may read her a certain way or they may read me a certain way, but you know, our identities are our own, and we don't have to answer to anybody else in regards to that. You know, I was afraid that I would lose her in this process. I wasn't sure if she would join me through this, but it didn't take very long to be able to tell that, you know, she was still there for me. And you know, there's a lot that our spouses do for us in transition. I can't tell you. Oh, I could actually. I could sit down and list out, how many times did she help me when I was recovering through surgery, or dealing with dysphoria, right? And you mentioned how Sam carried you as well. Transition is heavy lifting. It's heavy lifting for us to work through this process, but our spouses carry so much, as well, and that needs to be recognized. The work that the spouses do to, help the relationship and help the two of us get through this together. It's been an incredible process over here. It really has. But I think when two people love each other, and I think it's possible. It's possible to get through this together. So here you are now. You've been. How long have you been on T now?
Almost 2 years. So it'll be 2 years in July.
Okay.
So,
and I've been on HRT for a little over 2 years, almost 2.5 or 2 1/3 years at this point. Where do you see, the two of you going from here? What's your plan, going forward in your relationship?
This would be a good, I don't know. What is our plan?
By the way, I do love that I can see Sam's head in the background there.
I know.
While
Our
we've been talking.
Is
That's
small.
been great.
We live in San Francisco. Not a lot of space. So his little head is back there. But where are we headed? It's been such a crazy, wild ride, all of it. I mean, and it's been so good in so many ways. And really what we're focusing on most as of late is really just, allowing space for both of us to continue to grow as individuals. I feel like we're kind of at this stage in our lives and our careers where we're kind of assessing, what are our next steps going to be? Where do we kind of want to live, or do we want to travel around? Like, how do we want to do this sort of just life? and so there are lots of possibilities, but I think we're having a lot of conversations around our careers lately because we're both in sort of pseudo temporary positions right now. We work as postdoctoral scientists at a lab, and those positions are about 2 to 3 years long. So we have a lot of conversations around what we want to do after that, how we see our lives moving forward from here. And, it's always kind of about balance. How do we support what both of us want at the same time? That's kind of the big theme of so many conversations. I mean, that was the big theme of transitioning too. How do we support my transition while supporting what both of us need, emotionally, mentally, physically, all at the same time? And you don't always get that right. So we're really, practicing our balance and our giving to one another, allowing each other to have space. Something that's been really important to me recently is really trying to connect, like in real life, with my queer communities and getting to meet people face to face and having more conversations and having Sam be a part of that too. So we're really focusing on connections with friends, trying to free ourselves up for travel to be able to see those people and to do those things together. And as I become more and more engaged and a part of the queer community, I don't want that to be a singular experience. I want that to be something that we can both have together. So it's been really fun exploring that space together and all sorts of stuff. There who knows where this life will go. There could be so many things. But
yeah, I think with transition, it's an ongoing process, right? It's not something that's just over. You don't just get to a point and like, oh, okay, we're done. And for Laura and I, the vast majority of my physical transition is complete. There have been multiple surgeries and procedures I've had over the last couple of years here, and now it just sort of feels like it's our opportunity to normalize things, right? That we've been through all of this change. And now it's time for us to sort of sit back down and go forward as wife and wife. And we are still working on it. There is still therapy that happens there. There are still hard conversations that happen. But I think the important thing to note is that in any marriage, there are still those conversations to have. And we're still talking, we're still communicating, we're still working through the little things to make sure that we're able to go into the future together. It's a process. Marriage is a process, but you get in what you put out of it. So wait, you put in what you get out of it. I messed it up. That's all right. So we do have some viewer questions here. Yeah, we get a lot out of it. We've got some viewer questions. Let's go to our viewer questions. Did you ever think about coming out before marriage? We talked a little bit about this, but
yeah, I mean, for me, I was just really not even yet aware. I think I kind of always knew there was something a bit different going on for me, but I didn't have the language or the words to put to that. So I really didn't gain that until after we were married, really, and started kind of processing that. So yeah, I didn't really have a choice, I guess.
I know that in my case, we talked about this a little earlier. You brought it up, and I was going to mention it then, but I'll bring it up now. Trans representation was so problematic in the late 2000s or the late 90s, early 2000s, that it wasn't until well into my marriage that I even realized that you could be a trans woman and be a lesbian. Up to that point, I'd only been exposed to trans women who were in heteronormative type situations. And that was something weighing against me before marriage and coming out or anything like that, because I knew the way I felt. I knew who I was attracted to. So I just had so much confusion and fear still at that point that there was no way that I could have come out at that point in my life. Our next question here is, when did you know you had to take the chance and come out to your spouse?
Yeah, I mean, and I know I don't ever want this to sound cliche, but I really didn't have a chance, a moment that was a coming out with Sam. It was all so continual and organic, and I had this journey with my transness where when I finally started to question my gender identity, I was learning about not only transness as a whole, but other, forms of identity, including like non-binary identities and these things. So I was learning about non-binary identities, and I was like, oh, maybe this is it. Like, I had this idea that in order to be trans, you had to have been miserable your whole life with who you were, and this was just a narrative that I had somehow internalized throughout the course of my life. And I looked at my life and I was like, well, I've had a pretty good life, and like I've been happy here, and here, and like all these things have been great. So like maybe I just need a little bit, a little bit of manness, a little bit of in between, and that'll be enough. And so I started walking my way into my masculinity that way. And as I learned more and more about myself and things, then I really came to terms with the fact that I wasn't non-binary. I was actually just a man, and and that was great. And I could be a masculine man, but I had so many things tied up in fear of masculinity and just stories and impacts in my life that have occurred because of masculinity. So I had a lot of trauma wrapped up in masculinity. So it was really hard to embrace. And all of these conversations, all this detail of this process wasn't happening internally for me. It was happening in conversation. I mean, we would have these conversations, and I was processing with Sam. So I never had some barrier hoop to jump over. It was like little bitty steps, like maybe non-binary. Okay, maybe a little more masculine. Okay, maybe actually man. So that's really how it was for us. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it felt more like this was the last option. I felt like I had my back to the wall, basically. And I hate, to phrase it that way, but it's true. Again, I hate that it was a secret that I had to keep, or that I felt like I had to keep. But I had done everything I could to not come out. But I knew, especially when I was contemplating taking my own life, that's a really scary, terrible place to be in. And I hope that, if there is anyone out there watching right now, there are resources out there to help. We'll put a number on this episode for Trans Lifeline, which is an organization that is available 24 hours a day to take calls to assist people dealing with these feelings. There is a much better way of dealing with dysphoria than considering something drastic like that. And once I was able to work through that and know that, no, I want to be here. I want to be here for my kids. I want a chance to be who I am. That was when I finally came out. It was unbelievably hard to work through the moment. All right, we'll go to our next question here. And it is, when did you start noticing the effects of your transition? I guess you can take this any number of ways, really, physical, mental, or otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are so many ways you could take this question. I mean, and to be sort of very, I guess, I don't know what the right word is for it, but everybody transitions in different ways, right? So I feel like a lot of these questions get skewed towards medicalization that many transgender people do need and pursue, but many people don't. So there are many different ways in which you can start to notice or feel your transness. And for me, it was really powerful to when I finally kind of got to a point in my therapy where I had really broken into this idea of, okay, I know I'm not a woman, and I talked about the stages of that I went through with non-binary identities and embracing my masculinity, and that took some time, but when I really kind of got to this space where I could admit and accept that I wasn't a woman, and then begin to present much more masculine, it was so amazing. It was just so amazing and freeing to do that. And my therapist actually suggested to me that I have a space in which to explore this, because at the time I wasn't publicly out to people around me. So it was really hard to express what I was going through and how I felt and how euphoric, a really great pair of pants or a nice button down, over a binder really felt for me. So I started my Instagram page, and I used that page to just journal about when times it felt hard and when times it felt really good, to just start to see myself every little bit. And having a spouse who was so accepting of just every piece of me, I mean, not only am I so grateful for that, but it was so affirming in the moment. He never, I can't even think of a moment where he had an issue with my name or my pronouns. It was just always affirming, always accepting, always encouraging me to try new things. And early on in my transition, we actually went to a friend's wedding. So this might have been before I started T, or yeah, I think it was before I started testosterone. But it was the first time I went to any function like this, like a wedding, and didn't wear a dress. I would have always worn a dress, but I wore a pair of slacks and a button down, and Sam helped me tie my tie, and I had like suspenders on. I looked so good, and we just had so much fun. And none of my friends at this wedding knew, but they didn't have to know. Sam and I knew, And I was exploring and embracing this masculinity that I had, and it was so freeing to do that, and to have him by my side and encouraging me to do that. I mean, yeah, that's probably the earliest moments that I really started to feel the euphoria that really accepting my identity could bring.
That's an awesome answer. Just coming out, being able to finally talk about what I'd been hiding for the better part of 30 years was such a relief. And I remember in those early days just feeling so unburdened. So, I mean, even very early, in the first week or two, just not having to have this be a complete secret was already helping my emotional state, my emotional well being. I would end up starting HRT about a month and a half after I came out to Laura. And having her support at that point in time was incredible. She knew that this is something that I needed as part of my transition. And again, not that HRT is a part of everyone's transition, but it was a part of mine. And I didn't want to start HRT until we were both on the same page about it, because that was sort of the beginning of the end of the physical person that was there before. She knew that those changes would start coming soon after. And I actually held on to that prescription for a little while before I started taking it. And finally, she actually left me a really beautiful note, telling me that, no, it's okay. I want you to do this. And that was important for me, that I had her support and her understanding when I started it. And there it is right there. All right. We'll take a look at the next question. Let's see. How did you deal with your dysphoria while waiting on changes, hormones, or procedures?
Oh, man.
My answer is not very well.
Yeah, not always well. Definitely not.
Once you crack the egg, like, oh man, I've got to deal with this. I've got to go forward. I need to start making these changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, unfortunately for our spouses, they're here with us. They kind of take the brunt of some of those dysphoric moments while we're waiting. And again, I'm not sure how fair that is, but as our partners, they're there to comfort us. But I know I took a lot out on Laura, a lot of emotional investment, a lot of need there while I was trying to work through those dysphoric moments. That's a lot to ask of a person. And I know I learned as time went on through this process that when you're dealing with dysphoria, your spouse isn't always the best person to throw all that on. And that's really what led me to the online communities in the first place, was to make better friendships and relationships with people out there that were going through the same things that I was going through, because other people in our situation are way better equipped to answer questions or just console someone dealing with dysphoric type situations than my cis spouse was. And that's not a slight on her or anything like that, but she's already dealing with so much. She didn't need to be buried with every other dysphoric outbreak as well. So as time went on, I tried to build my network of support out there as well, so that she wasn't the only one carrying all that weight.
Gosh, yes. I think there are many things that can help with dysphoria, but you really hit the one that has helped me the most, and that is truly like my online community. And I'm so grateful that my therapist talked me into starting my Instagram when she did, which was like right at the beginning of my transition. I mean, you can scroll back to day one, before I had come out to anyone, but I was out to Sam, and it was my safe space. It was this place that I can go to, and I can write out these feelings, good or bad, and get them out there. And just hearing that, response from people saying, oh yeah, I feel this too, or, this is what I do. Have you tried these things? There are so many different things. Like, I had learned about binders before I had top surgery, but I learned about taping and different things and taping safely through Instagram and through YouTube. And it just, without these communities, it would have been such a different journey. And just having people to connect to that care and that really understand in their own way, have truly experienced that feeling in their own way, it makes a world of difference. And it doesn't mean that it goes away, but it means that you're not alone. And for me, that changes it. That changes it entirely. If I can not feel isolated, then I know that I can get through whatever it is that is giving me a hard time. Yeah.
All right. I think we've got one more pre-submitted question. So if you are watching one of the live streams right now and you want to get in on here, please go ahead and submit your questions now so Addison can grab those. But our last question that we had submitted was, how did you balance your needs during transition with the emotional needs of your partner?
Not always well. Man, talking. I mean, the best thing we ever did during our transition was therapy, was couples therapy. I mean, I've talked about therapy a lot during this hour, I know, but it's so true. I mean, it changed the game. It changed the way we communicate, and I always felt that we communicated well, but I'm a person that just talks a lot, and I talk a lot about myself. And sometimes I need someone in the room who's like a professional to be like, no, this isn't about you right now. This is about Sam. And like, let's hear what Sam has to say. And it just made a world of difference on how we approached our needs and in aspects of transition, but also I was transitioning at this moment where our entire lives were transitioning. We were finishing grad school. We were trying to find jobs. We needed to go to a place together. We needed to both find a job in the same place, which was just really stressful. We were both PhD students, so we were trying to write thesis documents and defend and do all of this stuff. And it was just, I don't know how we did it. I mean, some days I'm like, I really don't know how we did it. And I think it was just a lot of communication, and we weren't always good at that. And some days were not easy, and we messed up, and we didn't take care of ourselves or one another. But yeah.
No, I think that's a great answer. I know it's something that I struggled with here as well. Trying to balance those needs is hard, especially because my needs change so much. Before transitioning, I was very isolated and kind of withdrawn. And after coming out, I became a much more outgoing personality. And that was a huge change for Laura. And I think that, through this process, there were times where I pushed too far. And we had to, say, okay, time out. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out, what this new balance is going to look like for my needs versus her needs. And, I appreciate her when she calls me out in those situations and holds me accountable. But there have been times where I haven't always been so quick to catch those things as well. So it's a give and take. And unfortunately, transition is a lot of take in our situation. So trying to get that balance, trying to get our spouses what they need as well, that's where that communication comes into play. We need to be talking back and forth, not just be talking as well. That's critical. It's something that we've struggled with. It's something we still work on today. And the important thing, though, is that we talk about it and we try to work through it together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's all of our pre-submitted questions. I do want to pull Addison in and see how we're doing in the live chat tonight.
Hey guys. So yeah, we did have some questions, and the first one isn't about transition and marriage, but it is something that Thomas touched on. And the question was, any tips for dealing with unaccepting parents?
Patience. That's my biggest tip. So much patience. My parents were the kind of people and are the kind of people. I mean, when I came out to them, the first words out of their mouth were, "We love and support you, but," and it was the but that has taken and is continuing to take a long time. And it can be very, very painful. And conversations are difficult and messy and not always fair to them or to me. And it just has taken so much patience. That is one aspect of my relationships that I care so deeply about them, and they care so deeply about me that um, things are just really volatile in that respect, because the love between us, and I'm grateful for this, is so deep and very passionate. But they didn't understand this about me or my needs or what I needed, and they were very surprised by me coming out and needing to transition. And I didn't always understand that. I didn't always take that well. I had a very different view of myself. I knew myself in a very different way than they did. And it took me a long time to understand that, you know, maybe they just had a very different view of me. And that wasn't wrong, and it wasn't done to be malicious. It just, I meant certain things to them in their life, and some of those things you could say are right or wrong, but at the end of the day, they really do love me, and it's certainly worth working towards. And I know that that's not everyone's story, and sometimes you can have all the patience in the world and you're not going to get what you deserve or the love that you should, and that things can be really hard and often unsafe. So these things are really difficult. um, I do urge patience, but I also urge, that if things aren't going the way that they need to go in a relationship like that, it is okay to take a break or to step back. Even in a loving relationship that I have with my parents, I've had to take breaks. I've had to say, we're not going to have visits for a while because it's emotionally draining for me, and those are really hard conversations to have. But um, they're important to do. So I think you always have to be keeping your safety in mind, and your support system in mind. But these things are lifelong. Transitions are lifelong things. They don't end. Um, so patience is really important.
Samantha, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Well, I was pretty lucky. My parents were fairly supportive of my transition, but at the same time, they still did struggle at first in getting names right, pronouns right. They struggled to kind of put together what my timeline looked like, right? How my if they were talking about the past or anything like that, how do they refer to me? But they did come, and to touch on Thomas's point there about patience, that was a big part of it. I knew they were supportive. I knew they wanted to be there for me. It was just a matter of them trying to 33 years of me growing up. And they did get to the point, where it's really not a big deal anymore for me. So, if your parents seem supportive, if it seems like they're pushing, to get things right, give them that chance to get there, is what I would say. Now, if they're not, and not making progress, that's a different story. But if there is progress to be made and progress is happening, I'd say stay working towards it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we did have a couple questions from Victoria and Vanessa about whether your partner has put any limits on your transition, asked you to postpone or abstain from any process of it. Thomas, do you want to start?
No. Sorry. Um, no, I haven't really experienced that. I mean, I think ultimatums and things can be really tricky in relationships just in general. But I mean, I think there are differences, right? So there's acknowledging that both people need to be ready to a certain extent or accepting to a certain extent, if the priority is going to be maintained to the relationship, and to each other. So that's harping back on communication again, talking about these things. One of the things I was most terrified about and admitting to Sam about what my needs were for my transition was top surgery. I was just certain that, I mean, he was a man who was attracted to women, and that if I didn't have breasts, that this was going to be really, really difficult for us, to get through, and that that would change the whole dynamic of our relationship, and that he wouldn't want this for me. And I remember this conversation very vividly. I was just kind of breaking down and crying, and I was just like, well, what if I want top surgery? And he was like, he kind of looked at me, and this you kind of have to know Sam a little bit and how goofy and funny he is, but he just looked at me in this moment, and I'm in tears, mind you, and he goes, well, will you still have a butt? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I don't know. So it was just like, it was just so silly, but it was one of those moments that was so sweet, because I didn't realize that in that moment that the tension just needed to break, and he somehow saw that, and he didn't mean it in a disrespectful way, and he was just there for it. But we've never really set any limitations, as much as we've just really slowly talked about things. And I would say I'm often so cautious that I almost limit myself. I fear, confessing that I need something, and Sam almost knows it before I do. And so in that way, I never really felt like I was too far ahead of him, if that makes sense.
Samantha, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that one.
Yeah, I'd say in my situation, there we go. I didn't really have a situation where, I was told I couldn't do something or I had limitations put on. But I think with us, especially with having 4 kids, sometimes progress and transition wasn't always as straightforward as just going out, right? To work together and making sure that everything made sense, that the kids, were covered, the house was. So sometimes, unlike Thomas, I'm a very kind of like go type person. And Laura would be there to remind me that, this is great. We're going to take care of what you need, but we also have to make sure that our other obligations are taken care of as well. So I'd say for me, she acted as the voice of reason a lot of times in my transition, but there was never a moment where it was like an outright, no, you can't do this or anything like that. And frankly, that would have been very hurtful if she had tried to do something like that. Not that, she doesn't have a right to have her opinions or say in what happens, but it would have been very hard to deal with that, I think. I'm glad I didn't. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we do have a few more questions from the chat. Tiffany asked, if you ever felt guilt, like you were, and I want to get the words right here, taking the life that your spouse had signed up for away.
Ooh. Yeah, I felt guilt in there. I also felt guilt for keeping it a secret for as long as I did. But here's the reality of the situation. That, I came out and laid it out there and what I needed to do as part of this process. I would never have faulted Laura if she wanted to go. I still would have been there to help raise the kids. But, she chose to stay because this is where she wanted to be. So in that way, I don't think I really took away anything from her in that regard. And if anything, she now has a spouse that's actually happy and not racked with depression, and who wants to be here, and who is a better parent for their children. And I think that as time went on and she saw more of that, that also helped her, feel more comfortable in working through this relationship with me, working through this process with me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Guilt is a thing that I am always working through in its many, many forms. And this is my cat. And it's hard because it's almost always, for me, it's always been very internalized. It's not something that's being impressed upon me. It's not like Sam has ever communicated these feelings of that make me feel guilty. It's kind of this fear and anxiety that builds up in me that then makes me feel guilty and all of these other things. So in that way, it's always been very internal. But I think Samantha touched on a point that is so incredibly important, that I couldn't have even seen before my transition how I wasn't fully engaged just as a person, in my marriage, in my other relationships, and coming out and embracing my identity has just totally transformed and blossomed this whole new avenue for growth and connection, and things are just richer now. Like, they have more color. Like, there's just a depth to being, and conversations and moments with friends and with Sam and with family, and it's just so awesome. It's like amazing. And I just didn't even know. Like, I thought I had a pretty good life, and it was confusing to me why I thought I needed to change it so dramatically when I really started to embrace my identity. And then I was like, oh, wait, no, like, there's so much more life. And I really started to get it. And now it's like, I'm addicted to this happiness, to this growth, to this embracing of change, and how that can just make things so good in all sorts of areas of your life. So, yeah.
Well said. We did have one more question from Cameron, who was on the show recently. The question was there anything that your spouses were pleasantly surprised by during the process of transition, whether it be something physical that changed or changes in your personality?
That's a good one.
Yeah, I would love to know that answer, because I can't speak for Sam.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think if I had to guess, I'm just so much more, my emotions and my day-to-day are a lot more even now. Part of that, I think, is just emotionally, working through a lot of things, but also the emotional effects that can often come along with testosterone. It just kind of changes some things, and it's changed things for me in terms of the variability of my emotions and different things. So I know that has been a change that we've experienced and discussed. I think we just have a lot more fun now. I don't know. We've always had a lot of fun, but if I had to guess, I would think that would probably be the main thing. We have a lot.
Yeah, I'd say along the same lines as that, just, and she's told me before that she's just so much happier when she sees me happy, that I'm not just buried under all of that weight and sadness anymore. And I think, that my happiness projects in the rest of the house as well. So having a happy spouse is a good thing all around. It's been such an amazing process to go through with her. And I know that, now that I'm able to live as my true self, I am such a happier person than I was before.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and that's it for questions from the chat. Sorry, I just blanked out doing this whole questions. Thing. Back to you guys.
All right. No, I think we covered so much good conversation here tonight. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us and talking through this. You were one of my first guests when I was doing my Instagram Live, so I'm so glad to have you back on here on an official Trans IRL episode to share your story. And we talked about your Instagram page. You do an amazing job of talking through your day-to-day progress through your transition. I hope everyone watching is already following, and if not, please head over to your page, creating Thomas, creating_Thomas on Instagram. Just amazing writing, open, honest, truthful. It's one of my favorite pages, and everyone needs to subscribe.
So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for giving up some of your evening.
Oh, not giving up, giving in and just like having fun. And it's been so great. Thank you for inviting me to talk. I mean, this has just been amazing. It's awesome.
It is. And I'm so glad we had the chance to share our stories here. I know for both of us, for people watching, you can find us on Instagram. And if you have questions, concerns, and if you're dealing with something similar, reach out to us. We're available to answer questions.
Yes, definitely.
All right, let's take a second to talk about next week's episode. So next week, we're going to be doing a more open format episode, and our guest will be Erica Grace. And we're going to be talking about our transitions and discussing some of the emotional and physical tools that can assist during transition, and hopefully for the rest of your life as well. And I'd imagine at some point during the episode, we're also going to be talking about curly hair a little bit, so you'll have to forgive us there. But join us at our regular time. We'll be on next Thursday at 7:30 Pacific, 10:30 Eastern Time for the live show here on YouTube and Facebook. So let's bring everyone back on here really quick. I think the only other thing I wanted to bring up is that if you're out there and you're watching and you're interested in helping out with Trans IRL, reach out to Addison or I. We're actually looking for some help in running the show. We'll put more information up on the webpage here shortly, but I do want to thank Thomas again for your time tonight, and Addison for running the show as always. Really awesome conversation here, and I'm looking forward to talking to everyone again next week. So for all of us here, thanks for watching and have a great night.
Bye.